The old space station creaked under its own weight. Mason stepped over broken metal panels, scanning the dark hallways with a small flashlight. He had come here looking for salvage old tech. Parts, maybe some hidden credits, but the deeper he went, the quieter it became. Too quiet, he paused near an old cargo door. Its edges rusted and half-melted, just as he turned to leave. A small sound reached his ears, a sniffle. He stopped, another sniffle. And then, footsteps, soft and quick. "Who's there?" Mason called, his voice calm but firm. No answer. He raised his light and slowly turned the corner. That's when he saw her, a tiny alien girl. No taller than his waist, stood staring up at him. Her skin was a soft shade of blue, her hair wild and tangled, and her big silver eyes shimmered with fear. She clutched a torn blanket in one hand and looked far too thin for her age. "Hey, it's okay," Mason said softly, lowering his light. "I'm not here to hurt you." The girl took one shaky step forward, then another. She stopped in front of him, looked up with wide eyes, and asked in a small voice, "Human, are you single?" Mason blinked, not sure he'd heard her right. "What?" he asked, thinking he misheard her through the echo. The girl looked more serious now, her voice trembling. "My mom cries every night. She said, you have to marry her." Mason stared at her, speechless. Was this a game? Some strange alien joke? But the girl's eyes were full of tears, not playfulness, not mischief, just sadness and fear. "Wait. Where's your mom?" Mason asked carefully. The girl grabbed his hand, her fingers cold and small, and tugged him gently. "Come," she whispered. "Please come." He followed her through broken corridors, stepping over fallen beams and wires. The station had long been abandoned, but clearly, not by everyone. They reached a sealed chamber behind a half-broken cargo bay. The girl entered first, ducking under a metal sheet, and Mason followed. Inside, the room was dim but warm, heated by some old generator that still hummed. In the corner lay a figure, an alien woman curled up on a pile of blankets, her back turned. "Mama," the girl whispered, "I brought a human." The woman didn't move. Only her shoulders shook slightly. She was crying. Quietly, trying to hide it, Mason stepped closer. And the woman turned her face. Slowly, she had the same silver eyes as her daughter. But hers were tired, swollen, and full of fear. Bruises marked her cheek, and her lips were cracked. "Who?" she began to ask, but her voice broke. The girl knelt beside her and said, "He's a human, Mama. He can protect us." Mason knelt too, unsure what to say. The woman didn't speak, just stared at him like she was trying to decide if he was real. "Listen," he said gently, "I'm not here to hurt anyone. Are you in danger?" The woman looked at her daughter, then nodded slowly. "Yes," she whispered, "slavers. They come sometimes. We hide." Mason's jaw clenched. Slavers, he hated that word. And now he understood the girl's strange request. "She thinks, if I marry you, they won't take us," the woman said with shame in her voice. "I told her it's not how it works, but she believes in humans." The girl looked up, hopeful. "You're strong," she said, "and kind." "I know." Mason didn't know what to say. This wasn't salvage. This wasn't a job. This was a cry for help, soft, desperate, from a child who had nothing left to offer but a question. "What's your name?" he asked the woman. "Lyra." She replied, barely audible. Mason looked between them, the mother too weak to stand, the daughter too brave for her age. He stood slowly, adjusted his jacket, and said, "All right. Lyra, I'm not leaving you here." He turned to the girl and added, "No promises about marriage, but I'll keep you both safe." The girl smiled for the first time. Not big, not loud. Just a small flicker of hope in her pale blue face. From behind the wall, metal creaked again. Something or someone was coming, and Mason knew, whatever this was, it had just begun. The noise outside the shelter grew louder. Metal groaned, and heavy boots echoed down the ruined hallway. Mason reached for his sidearm, quietly clicking the safety off. He stepped in front of the alien girl and her mother, blocking the view from the cracked door. "Stay quiet," he whispered. Lowering his voice, "Don't move." The girl held her breath and clutched her mother's hand. Lyra, the mother, had sat up now, her face pale and tense. She didn't ask questions, didn't panic. She had learned how to stay invisible. Outside, the boots stopped. There were voices, low, angry, speaking in a mix of galactic slang and trade code. Mason couldn't make out all the words, but one sentence chilled him: female and a child. Hiding somewhere in this section, Mason's jaw tightened. They were being hunted. Then, silence. Minutes passed like hours. The sound faded as the patrol moved deeper into the corridors. Mason exhaled slowly and finally turned to Lyra. "We need to move," he said. "They're close." Lyra looked down, her voice flat. "I can't go far. I haven't eaten in 3 days." The girl whispered, "Mama doesn't smile anymore." "Not since the last raid." Mason crouched beside a broken supply crate and pulled out a sealed protein bar from his kit. "Here," he said, handing it to Lyra. "Eat this first. We'll find a safer place soon." Lyra stared at the bar like it was treasure. She hesitated, then broke it in half and gave the bigger piece to her daughter. The girl tried to give it back, but Lyra insisted, smiling just a little, but it was shaky and disappeared fast. Mason watched her closely. There was something about the way she avoided his eyes, the way her hands trembled. Not just fear, something deeper. Shame, maybe. Loss, definitely. "You've been here long?" he asked gently. "Too long," Lyra answered. "We were left behind when our ship was destroyed." No one came back. Her fingers tightened around the blanket. "I kept waiting, hiding, running when I had to." Mason looked around the room. It was barely a shelter, just scraps of metal shaped into a corner of safety. And yet, they had survived here. Somehow. "Why did your daughter think marriage would save you?" he asked, not unkindly. Lyra didn't speak at first. Then she said, "Because I told her once, humans protect their own. And if a human married me, I wouldn't be taken again." She laughed bitterly. It was just a bedtime story. She believed it. The girl sat by the small heater now, warming her hands. She looked at Mason and said softly, "You're strong. You looked like someone who wouldn't let us go." Mason felt something twist inside him. This wasn't just survival. This was a little girl trying to rebuild her broken world with him in it. "I don't know about marriage," he said, forcing a gentle tone. "But I won't let anything happen to either of you." Lyra stared at him then, like she didn't know whether to trust him or cry. "Why would you help us?" she asked. "We have nothing." Mason stood and walked to the door. Checking the hallway. "You have something no one else has asked me for in a long time," he said. "What's that?" Lyra asked behind him. He looked over his shoulder. Hope, for a second. The silence in the room wasn't heavy. It was still but warm. The girl leaned against her mother's arm and closed her eyes. Lyra looked down at her daughter, brushing a hand over her tangled hair. "Mason," she said, "my daughter's name is Solra." He nodded. "Solra. That's a beautiful name." Suddenly, a loud thump echoed outside. Mason grabbed his weapon again. But this time, it wasn't boots, it was something heavier, like a door forced open or a panel falling down. "We have to move now," he said sharply. "There's an old escape shaft 2 levels down." It might still be working. Lyra struggled to her feet, swaying. Mason rushed forward and supported her gently. "I've got you," he said. We moved together. Solra stood up too, holding her mother's coat with one hand and Mason's pant leg with the other. She looked up and whispered, "Please don't leave her behind." Mason nodded firmly. Not a chance. Together, they stepped back into the shadows of the old station. But this time, they weren't alone, and the quiet, strength in Sora's voice echoed in Mason's mind. Her mom didn't smile anymore, but maybe, just maybe, she would again. The elevator shaft was dead. No lights, no sounds, just cold, stale air rising from the dark below. Mason stared into it with a frown. Holding the emergency glow stick over the edge, "This was supposed to be our way out," he muttered, behind him. Lyra leaned against the wall, her breath shaky. Sora held her mother's hand tightly, her small eyes scanning every shadow. They had barely escaped the upper level, and now they were stuck again. Mason reached for the emergency ladder bolted along the side. "It's a long climb," he said, "but it's our best shot." "I can climb," Lyra said weakly, "but—" Even standing was hard for her. "You're not climbing alone," Mason replied. "I'll carry you if I have to." Just then, a siren blared through the upper corridor. A robotic voice followed. Echoing down the hallway, "Unregistered aliens." "Detected Sector 9, Lyra's eyes went wide. "They're scanning." "They'll find us." Sora looked up at Mason, whispering, "Can't we do it? The thing I said, marriage." Mason blinked. He wasn't sure what shocked him more, her repeating that idea, or the fact that a part of him was actually considering it now. "Marriage isn't magic, kid," he said gently, "but it might make a difference if they're scanning for non-registered individuals." Lyra suddenly spoke, her voice almost breaking. "There's an old registry console 2 levels down. If we register a bond under human protection laws, the scans will ignore us." Mason's eyes narrowed. "Wait, are you saying if I marry you by the system we'll be hidden?" Lyra nodded slowly, "As long as the human accepts the alien partner under his protection and declares her as bonded." Her voice cracked. "That's why she asked." "She heard me talk about it once." Footsteps echoed in the distance again. Louder, now closer. Mason looked at Lyra, then at the child, then back again. He didn't know these people didn't owe them anything, but somehow they had slipped under his skin. He couldn't just walk away. Not now. "All right," he said. "Let's find that console." They moved fast, down rusted ladders and broken walkways. Mason led the way with his weapon ready, Lyra holding Sora's hand close. They finally reached an old admin room with a functioning registry console powered by a backup cell. "Still works," Mason muttered, surprised. Lyra stepped forward and brought up the bond registration form. It was short, simple, and very real. She hesitated as she looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to do this, I know," Mason said. "But I'm doing it anyway." As he reached out to confirm the bond, the door behind them slammed open. A group of armored patrol officers stepped in, eyes glowing under visors, weapons raised. "Freeze. Step away from the terminal." Mason stood tall, positioning himself between the patrol and Lyra. "Too late," he said, pressing the final confirmation button. "She's under my protection now." The lead officer paused, scanning the console. His voice turned cold. "Proof? What?" Mason asked, his heart racing. "We need to verify physical confirmation," the officer said. "Otherwise, it could be a forged entry. Show the bond now." Mason looked at Lyra. She was frozen, trembling eyes, full of shame and fear. Sora clung to her, tears brimming. Mason stepped closer, gently took Lyra's hand. "I need your permission," he said softly. "Only if you agree." Lyra looked at Sora, then at Mason. Her voice shook, but she nodded, and then, without a word, Mason leaned in and kissed her. It was soft, hesitant but real. She didn't flinch this time. She leaned in just enough for the scanner on the console to blink green. The officer checked his datapad, then lowered his weapon. "Confirmed bond," he said, motioning his team back. "Move out." The patrol left as fast as they came, vanishing into the dark. The room fell silent again. Lyra let out a shaky breath. "I thought they'd take her," she whispered. Mason placed a hand on her shoulder. "I said I'd protect you both." Sora looked up with a wide smile. "Does this mean you're really married now?" Mason chuckled. "Well, the system thinks so." Lyra looked away, blushing. "Don't worry," Mason added quickly. "We'll figure it out later." But deep down, something had changed. It wasn't just a system entry. It wasn't just survival. It was the beginning of something. They didn't have a name for it yet. The shelter was quiet again. But this time, it felt different. Not because it was safer, but because, for the first time. Lyra slept without crying. Mason sat near the door, his back against the wall, weapon. Resting across his lap, Sora slept curled beside her mother, her small hand wrapped tightly around Lyra's arm. The soft hum of the generator filled the space. Flickering light from the corner heater-painted shadows on the metal walls. Mason didn't move, didn't speak. He just watched them breathe. When morning came, not that time mattered in the dead. Station Lyra stirred. She sat up slowly, blinking away sleep. Her eyes met Mason's across the dim room. He gave a tired nod. "You slept?" he said. Voice quiet. Lyra looked down, touching her cheek as if surprised it was dry, I guess. "I did," she whispered. First time in weeks. Sora stretched beside her and smiled. "See, Mama? I told you." Lyra gently ran her fingers through her daughter's tangled hair. Smiling faintly. Not big, not bold, but it was a real smile. Mason stood and stretched his arms. "We've got maybe one day before they come back," he said. "We need supplies. And a way off this place." Lyra frowned. "There's an old shuttle dock below the service bay," she said, "abandoned. But maybe fixable." Mason nodded. "Then that's our goal." He walked over to his small walled pack and pulled out his last protein bar. Broke it in 3 pieces, handed one to Lyra. One to Sora. Lyra hesitated. "You eat too." "I will," Mason lied with a half smile. Later. They moved together, now 3 people who just days ago were strangers. Down shattered stairs, through leaking corridors filled with old wires and rusted pipes. Mason led the way, flashlight cutting through the dark. Lyra followed with Sora close behind. They reached the lower level near the old cargo processing zone. The door to the shuttle dock was stuck, metal fused and bent. Mason placed his hand on it and muttered, "Great." He looked around and spotted a fuse box nearby. "I can try rerouting power to override the lock," he said. Lyra nodded, watching him quietly as he worked. As Mason fiddled with wires, Lyra stepped aside and sat on a crate with Sora. Her daughter leaned against her, voice soft. "Mama? You smiled this morning?" Lyra looked at her, surprised. "I did." Sora nodded, eyes bright. Because he was there, Lyra's heart trembled. She had forgotten what hope even felt like. Now, it clung to her daughter's voice like a warm breeze in cold air. Behind them, a spark flew. Mason cursed softly and yanked his hand back. "Almost there," he muttered. Suddenly, Lyra stood and walked over to him. "You're hurt," she said, noticing a burn mark on his hand. "It's nothing," he replied, brushing it off. She reached for his wrist anyway, gently holding his arm. "Let me see." Mason froze. Her touch was careful, like someone who hadn't been allowed to care for others in a long time. He looked at her face, and for a moment, the fear was gone. "You don't have to take care of me," he said softly. "I want to," Lyra replied, just as soft. Then she looked away, realizing what she'd said. "I mean, you've done so much already." Mason smiled a little, still nice to hear. Just then, the door groaned and slid open, power finally reaching its circuit. A faint breeze touched their faces, air from the sealed shuttle dock. Mason turned toward it, Let's see if there's a miracle waiting inside. Inside the dock sat a rust-covered emergency shuttle. It looked like it hadn't moved in decades, but the frame was intact. And the reactor light blinked weakly, still alive. Solra clapped her hands. A ship. Mason stepped up to the control panel and whistled. This old bird might just fly again. Lyra stepped beside him, cautious but hopeful. If we can get out of here... She didn't finish the sentence. Mason looked at her. You'll be free. Lyra turned to him and asked quietly, what happens after? He paused. I don't know, he admitted. We survive. Then decide. She didn't argue, just nodded slowly. Her eyes met his, and this time, she didn't look away. Mason took her hand. I didn't fake that registry, he said. I meant it when I said I'd protect you. Lyra whispered, I know. Her voice cracked, but not from fear, from something else. Trust, maybe, or something close. Behind them, Solra curled up on one of the shuttle's old chairs, her voice drowsy. You're really married now. So we have to stay together. Mason chuckled and looked at Lyra. Well, he said. Guess we're in this for the long haul, and for the first time in years, Lyra laughed. The shuttle's engines sparked to life with a cough. Not a roar, but a shaky breath from a tired machine that still had something left to give. Mason leaned back, wiping sweat from his brow. Reactors holding, he said. Not pretty. But we can fly. Lyra sat on the floor beside the pilot seat, her arms around Solra. The little girl rested quietly now, her fingers playing with the folds of Mason's jacket he'd given her. Where will we go? Lyra asked softly. Mason didn't answer at first. He was staring at a blinking message that had appeared on the shuttle's comm panel, one he hadn't expected. Bounty alert, wanted Lyra Vexa, former resistance sympathizer, 20,000 credits. Alive, his heart dropped. Lyra? A wanted criminal. He looked at her not like a fugitive. Not like a traitor. Just a woman who had suffered more than anyone should. She noticed his silence. What is it? She asked, her voice tight. Mason turned the panel away with one hand. Just interference, he lied. We'll find a place off-grid. But the bounty was real. And 20,000 credits could change his entire life. That night, they stopped at a hidden orbital station, an old place where no one asked questions. Mason told them to wait on the ship while he looked for supplies. He stepped into the neon-lit trade market, the message still flashing in his datapad. Turn her in, and you're free. Turn her in, and you're rich. He could buy a home, a better ship, a future. No more running, no more scavenging, but every time he thought about turning her in, he saw Solra's face. He remembered the girl's voice. Please don't leave her behind. Mason clenched his fists and walked past the bounty board. Didn't even look back. Back on the ship, Lyra waited. In silence, she hadn't asked where Mason had gone, but part of her feared the answer. When he stepped back inside, arms full of food and supplies, her eyes filled with something between shock and relief. You came back, she whispered. Of course I did, he said simply. Lyra's hands trembled as she took the bag from him. She turned her face away so he wouldn't see the tears forming. You had every reason to leave, she said, her voice cracking. No one would have blamed you. Mason sat beside her. Not too close, not too far. I had every reason, he agreed. But not one that mattered more than staying. Lyra looked at him, now really looked. And for the first time, she saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen in a long time. Not pity, not duty, but choice. He chose to stay, later that night. Mason sat at the edge of the cargo bay, staring at the stars through the open hatch. Lyra walked over, wrapping Solra in a blanket and setting her gently in a corner bed. Then she sat beside him, quiet for a while. I was part of the resistance, she said suddenly. Mason didn't react. Just let her speak. I never fought. but I helped. I gave them information, food, places to hide. She sighed. They labeled me a traitor. Even though all I wanted was peace, Mason finally looked at her. I don't care about what they called you, he said. I care about who you are now. Lyra smiled, bitter and soft. I'm a mother who begged a stranger to marry her, Mason chuckled, and I'm the stranger who said yes. She looked at him with gentle eyes. You didn't just say yes, she said, you stayed. When no one else ever did, he turned toward her, resting his shoulder against hers. I'm not going anywhere, he said quietly. She leaned into him, just a little, and this time, neither of them needed words. The ship's scanner blinked. Red. A patrol ship was approaching. Mason stood. We need to move again. Lyra nodded. Already helping Solra sit up. No panic, this time just readiness. They were a team now. Mason powered the engines and lifted the shuttle off the dock. Stars stretched around them as they disappeared into space. On the screen, another message flashed. Bounty status. Active new warning. Suspected human accomplice Mason smirked. Guess I'm worth something now too. And as the stars blurred into lines, he tightened his grip on the controls and whispered, let them come. I'm not letting her go. The trial hall was cold, silent, and too bright. Mason stood at the center, hands behind his back, flanked by 2 galactic peace officers in the seats around him. Alien delegates watched from behind glass panels, expressionless. Unreadable, Lyra sat on the other side of the chamber. Her wrists bound with glowing cuffs. Solra wasn't allowed inside. The guards had taken her to a holding room for safety, but Mason knew what it really was, leverage. An artificial voice rang out. This is not a criminal trial, it said. This is a hearing to confirm the legitimacy of a cross-species bond. Mason glanced at Lyra. She looked exhausted, but she lifted her head and met his eyes. That look said it all. Don't lie, don't run, just be real. The lead officer stood and read aloud. Human male Mason Reich filed a protective bonding claim with alien civilian Lyra, Vexa. New evidence suggests the bond may have been fraudulent made to avoid bounty detection. Murmurs rose in the room. Mason stepped forward, his voice firm. I filed it to save her life, he said. But that doesn't mean it was fake. The officer raised a brow. Then you are saying the bond is real. Mason hesitated for half a second, then nodded. Yes. A holographic image appeared, showing their registration and the kiss that sealed it. But the officer didn't look convinced. One moment of contact isn't enough, he said. Show us the proof, emotional, physical, or cultural. What do you want? Mason snapped, a wedding dress. Rings? No, the officer replied coldly. We want her to speak. He turned to Lyra. Tell us. Did you agree to the bond because you loved him more, because you were afraid? Lyra froze, her voice caught in her throat. She looked at Mason. Then, at the glass wall where Solra was watching silently. Her small face pressed to the window. Then Lyra stood. No one protected me before, she said. Her voice steady despite the weight in it. Not when I begged, not when I bled. She stepped forward, dragging the cuffs with her. But this man, this human, risked his life when he had nothing to gain. She looked at Mason and smiled not. With lips, but with eyes full of tired hope. I didn't fall in love the day he kissed me, she said, but I did the day he didn't leave. The crowd went still. Even the officers said nothing. And if you're asking whether I agreed because I was afraid, she added, then yes, I was. But I'm not afraid anymore, Mason. Swallowed hard, he wanted to reach for her, pull her into his arms right there. But he knew the process wasn't over. The officer nodded. Then we moved to final verification. What does that mean? Mason asked warily. The lights dimmed, and a new hologram lit the room. Saura's face, her eyes wide with confusion. We will ask the child, the officer said. Mason stepped forward instantly. "She's just a kid. Don't drag her into this," but the officer raised a hand. "She is the only neutral voice between you two," he said, "and children do not lie." Inside the holding room, Solra was handed a cum device. Her little voice echoed through the trial hall. "Do you believe this man loves your mother?" The officer asked. Solra didn't even pause. "Yes," she said. "He looks at her like she matters. And does your mother love him?" Solra giggled softly. "She talks in her sleep," she said. "She says his name when she thinks no one hears." The room fell silent again. The officer gave one final nod. "Verified," he said. Bond recognized the cuffs on Lyra's. Wrists blinked, then opened and fell to the floor. The crowd began to leave, some in silence, others whispering in surprise. Lyra walked toward Mason slowly. When she reached him, she whispered, "You stayed." Mason looked down at her and smiled. "And I'm still staying." She placed her hand on his chest right where his heartbeat was strongest. "Then take me away from here," she said, "not as a protector, but as my husband." He nodded, without another word. They turned and walked out together. Behind them, the lights dimmed and the trial chamber emptied. But one thing was clear now. Their bond wasn't made of fear, or lies, or survival. It was real, and no law in the galaxy could break it now. The shuttle broke through the purple clouds of Arasneen, a peaceful planet tucked in the edge of neutral space, far from patrols, bounty hunters, and war. Mason sat at the controls, his hand resting lightly over the navigation lever beside him. Lyra stared out the window with wide eyes. She had never seen green land stretch so far without smoke or ruins. Behind them, little Solra pressed her face to the side panel. "Look, Mama," she said excitedly. "Trees? Real trees." Lyra nodded, smiling softly. "Yes, baby," she whispered. "That's our new beginning." The shuttle landed gently on a grassy patch near a cluster of quiet homes. They had been granted asylum through the official registry of home. A new identity and peace. Mason stepped out first, scanning the open air. The sun felt warmer here. Even though it was weaker than Earth's, he turned and offered his hand to Lyra. She didn't hesitate this time. Solra jumped down right after them, laughing as her feet touched soft ground. They were safe. The home they were given was small. Simple, but perfect. 2 rooms, a shared kitchen, and a garden filled with blue-leafed plants. Lyra explored slowly. Touching the walls like she was trying to believe they were real, Solra ran from room to room. Her laughter echoing like music Mason hadn't heard in years. Mason opened a storage crate that had been delivered fresh food, clothes, a welcome package. He smiled when he saw what was inside. Children's books in multiple alien languages. He turned to find Lyra, leaning on the doorway. "Feels strange, doesn't it?" he asked. Lyra nodded, too quiet. "To clean, that's peace," he said. "Takes time to get used to." She looked at him with something soft in her eyes, something that had been growing between them since the moment they first shared fear. Now it was growing into something more. "Thank you," she said. Her voice low, not just for the bond or the ship or saving us. She stepped closer. "Thank you for letting me feel like a person again." Mason's chest tightened. "I didn't do it for thanks," he said. "I did it because I saw. You and I couldn't walk away." Lyra looked up at him, her voice trembling. "You still can." If this was only survival, he shook his head, gently placing a hand on her cheek. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "Not now, not ever." Later that night, they sat on the porch under the twin moons. Solra was asleep inside, curled. With a stuffed toy Mason had found in the crate, Lyra leaned against his shoulder. A blanket wrapped around both of them. "I dreamed of this once," she said, "but I didn't think it would ever happen." "What part?" Mason asked. "The peace." "No," she replied. The feeling of belonging to someone. Without chains, without bargains, Mason turned to her slowly. "You don't belong to me." He said, "You belong with me." Lyra didn't answer. She just kissed him. Not out of fear, not to prove anything, but because she wanted to. Weeks passed, and the house began to feel like home. Solra started attending a nearby learning center where alien and human children studied together. She came home with drawings always of 3 people holding hands. Standing under 2 suns, she called it her forever picture. One day, she stood in front of them, holding something behind her back. "What's that?" Mason asked. With a smile, Solra pulled out a small stone circle with a ribbon around it. "It's a wedding crown," she said proudly. "I made it in school." Lyra raised an eyebrow, smiling. "Wedding crown?" Solra nodded seriously. "Teacher said some humans use rings, but I made this for you too. Because now we're a real family." Mason knelt down, taking the crown gently. "Then I guess we should wear it," he said. Lyra bent down too, and they placed the little crown between them. Solra clapped her hands. "Now it's official." Mason laughed and pulled them both into a hug. And for the first time since this journey began, he didn't feel like a wanderer or a protector. He felt like a husband, like a father, like someone who had finally come home. The past was not forgotten. The scars were still there, but in this small house under alien stars. Something stronger had grown, a bond no scanner could measure. A marriage not built on rules or paper, but on trust, kindness, and the hope of a little girl with big silver eyes.